Hello, everyone. I am happy to be here today to talk to you about combining digital literacy and writing process instruction to foster language development in grades kindergarten through grade 12. I'm Nicola Wolf Nelson. I'm a professor emerita at Western Michigan University in the USA, and I have done a lot of work in this area. And I'm going to share my screen, and the learning outcomes based on this session are that I'd like you to be able to list elements of digital literacy that can be targeted in a writing lab approach, to be able to match digital features to associated writing processes and language targets, because that's the crux of this presentation, to think about how we can get more bang for our buck by working on multiple things in the same activities. And the third major learning outcome for you is to be able to plan curricular projects with teachers to help students in these grades, K-12, to be able to acquire digital literacy competencies while they're also developing their higher level language, reading and writing, and communication skills. I have no conflicts of interest, either financial or non-financial, for this presentation, but I do need to acknowledge a lot of support from the US government in projects that were funded with colleagues Christine Barr and Adelia Van Meter, where we developed some of these ideas. However, these ideas are my own and not those of the US government. I also want to acknowledge many graduate students, teachers, children, adolescents who taught us. Let's start by thinking about digital literacy competencies and what kinds of things we can target using a writing lab approach. There are 2 F's, functional skills and finding and evaluating information, as well as critical thinking, communicating, collaborating, creativity. These are all skills that are associated with digital literacy that we can help our students attain. I want to just give you a very brief overview of the writing lab approach. It has 3 major components. Writing processes are used as a context for curricular instruction for all students, and language intervention for students with special needs. The second component is that it's an inclusive approach, and that's where the instruction and intervention get combined, in that it's collaborative. You work in the classroom with the general ed teacher as a speech language pathologist, although you could also hold after school activities or even use a one-on-one clinical setting to do some of these activities I'm going to be talking about. It's also an opportunity for individualized intervention on the goals that your students already have. The third major component is one that's particularly important for this presentation, and that is we use computers and computer technology and functions for all stages of the writing process, not just publishing, which historically I think was the impression. So let's think a little bit more about how we combine instruction and intervention in collaboration with a teacher. So if we can, we would schedule the speech language pathologist 2 to 3 days a week working in classrooms and computer labs. And that's probably more the historical view, because now most children have their own laptops or they can be rolled in on a station. Teachers and speech language pathologists work side by side with the students. We use real curricular assignments and projects that will be accomplished over multiple days so that the students can work on different phases of this. And that's one way that we built in those different digital literacy competencies. And as I say, special needs students are included for all the instruction in that project. To start, you collect and analyze some baseline writing probes where you can then analyze those at the discourse level, sentence level, sound word level, and using observation of self-regulation and social interaction in the classroom while children are using these writing processes and using their computers. You plan then with the classroom teacher a curriculum-based project. I'll give you several examples of those that will use all of the writing processes and include these digital literacy learning opportunities. And in the process, you work on their curriculum goals, also their writing, including their writing processes, and then their individualized language literacy objectives, as well as the classroom curricular objectives and the digital literacy goals that we are emphasizing in this presentation. So I put this slide together to help us sort of see how we can line up these three major components: the writing processes, brainstorming topics, planning and organizing, drafting, revising and editing, and then presenting and publishing by working across the language levels. While we're working on discourse, we can brainstorm our topics and organize a story, or we can organize a report, the kind of discourse that's going to be called for. We apply a lot of executive skills while doing those things and teach students how to think about brainstorm internally and think about the different kinds of topics, and maybe to use some software to help them maybe do some searching for clip art that might stimulate their ideas, or maybe some other kinds of sources to help them plan their report. And then while they're drafting, we can work on vocabulary, sentence structure, sound word skills. We can certainly also go back and look at those again during revising and editing, and presenting and publishing give us lots of opportunities, and also give us some feedback for changes that the students might want to make. Some, again, use of communication and executive skills. The digital literacy competencies that we're using for these things are some functional skills like spell check, insert and delete, cut and paste functions, finding intervention or information on the internet about a topic that they're writing about, some critical thinking skills as they make decisions during this whole process, communicating with their peers, collaborating with their peers, and being creative. So let's think about some of those functional skills that computer functions can support. So for planning, there's software that is designed for graphic organizing, mind mapping. There's clip art. I mentioned here Janet Sturm's first author program, research for report writing kinds of helps for planning, and then drafting and revising and editing tools. You see there, spell check, insert new text, cut and paste, use page reader feature. Sometimes it helps children hear the errors in their sentence structure, or recognize where punctuation may be needed when they hear the computer reading aloud their work and not stopping where they intend for it to. Publication, presentation, collaboration features, things like fonts can be very changing fonts, changing borders, adding borders, illustrations, using software to present, writing with a partner in shared documents. All of these give us opportunity for developing both language and communication skills and computer literacy skills. So let's look at some curriculum applications where we can target both language and literacy learning and digital literacy competencies side by side. Here's an example of a project that we did with fifth graders. Lydia was a student who's an English language learner, and you see that she wrote this about the author piece. Her favorite state is, my favorite state is California. That's where I was born. I like to play sports. Now you can see some opportunities to scaffold her language skills a little bit more. She's working on thinking about needing to capitalize, but she used a slash mark, which usually to editors means to make something lowercase. Anyway, she's thinking about letter case at the beginning of sentences, but it's probably not the best coordinating conjunction here. My favorite sport is soccer and hockey. I like my family who lives with me now. I like studying about the weather. She knew that was a spelling error. I want to be someone special like my teachers. She made note of the need for space and maybe punctuation. all the teachers I have are helpful and nice. They made me go on and begin a new grade level that I should begin and start a new life that is ahead of me. And you know what? I thank them. My favorite food is pizza, macaroni, and spaghetti. She might need a little revising help there. This helps me. I love writing and hope you enjoyed my writing. And my mom or dad help me when I need help. So she's got a sense of how that she might add some details and probably could use some help with cutting and pasting, and as she revises to get the organization at an optimal level. But there's a lovely picture there as well. And so there's some skill in learning how to insert art. The expository text macro structure can take a number of forms. And one of the ways that students can develop their computer literacy skills is to map out the type of structure that they're seeing in a text. So a lot of scientific texts have this sort of hierarchical, superordinate, subordinate kind of structure. Other kinds of discourse have a procedural sequence. Some have compare and contrast, some are cause and effect or antecedent and consequence. And students can learn to use their software tools for understanding these kinds of relationships and representing them graphically. So here are a few examples of how we've used targeted digital literacy in compare and contrast projects. One thing that we have done multiple times in third grade classrooms is introduce students to this idea of comparison and contrast by pairing them up with a partner, so that this is an opportunity, by the way, to work on their collaboration skills as well and their communication skills. So they generate a list of how they are alike, their similarities list, and type that in. Maybe they can pick some clip art, which is great for categorization and vocabulary development. And then they can also put their names in and describe ways that they may be different from each other. In fifth grade, we have used similar kinds of software for science activity where the students were picking a form of weather that they wanted to describe and describing it in their PowerPoint presentation. And in any grade, it can be used really to help support this and other software. This is an older edition. I did look it up and there's a link. I'm not advocating that you purchase it. I get no royalties from any of that, but there are a lot of different kinds of diagramming and mind mapping software that you can find online. Here's just an example of how students might organize a compare and contrast discussion about hurricanes and tornadoes. Here's an example of how they might set up a digital literacy, use digital literacy skills to set up a hierarchical categorization of animals, vertebrate and invertebrate. This is one of my favorite ways to help kids develop their comprehension skills. And if they're helping to develop the chart, using computer resources, they can be learning two things at once. I would call this an is a has a kinds of chart. And the way you teach students to use this is to, as they're learning about how animals might be categorized, for example, as what are two kinds of animals. The two main categories of animals are vertebrate and invertebrate. What does a vertebrate animal have? Well, it has a backbone. An invertebrate does not. And then what kinds of vertebrate animals are there? Well, they're warm-blooded and cold-blooded. What's the difference between a mammal and a bird? Well, mammals have fur. They have ways to feed their babies milk. They give live birth. They have teeth, usually. And birds don't lay eggs. I mean, they lay eggs instead. They have no milk. They use wings and feathers to fly, or some of them can't quite fly, but there are other kinds of. So what's a dog? It's a kind of mammal, warm-blooded vertebrate animal. What is a spider? It's an invertebrate animal with jointed legs. And you can see how you can help children categorize and organize their understanding of categorical meanings. Targeting digital literacy and story writing projects can also involve seeking clip art that's going to both stimulate the idea, but also maybe illustrate the story. So Bill was a third grader who had a developmental language disorder, and his story here demonstrates how he was able to use some clip art to get started and to illustrate his fictional story and to develop his functional literacy skills. You can't see his screen reading use, but that was helpful to him. Robots are back again. You see, we ran out of time to get this fully edited, but the robots are back again, and they're big and bad, and they're killing people, and they're wrecking down houses, and they're living on our house, and we have to stay in our house and not go outside. If we go outside, the robots will kill us, and we will never see our mom and dad, and they will miss us. So I don't know if we had grammar checking turned on, but it would have picked up that hour, R for hour, and given you an opportunity to help scaffold that. Here's another student who had an intellectual developmental disability who was also in a grade 3 classroom, but he was not functioning close to the way his peers in the class were functioning. This was his baseline story, and you can see he has some scribbles and some drawings, but a few letters that are sequenced, an attempt to sequence the letter, and it's in his name. He had a lot of difficulty with social skills. His idea of making friends was getting under the table, making silly faces. He had difficulty understanding the concept of a story or forming meaningful sentences. He was an emergent reader, writer, very much at a beginning stage. I don't think he'd had the kind of structured instruction that he needed. But at the same time, what could we do in the writing lab and help him with these kind of his perennial goal and objective on his IEP or his individualized education plan was to sequence the letters in his name. And you can just see about how far that was going to get him in life. So one of the things that Dee found very useful was selecting clip art, which would stimulate him to think of a topic idea, something he could write about. So he dictated this story. There was some shared typing on the computer with initial sounds, etc. But mostly he was generating the sentences orally and dictating them, and someone else was helping him get his words into the computer. And this was a story, Horse. If you go in the gate, it will bite you. You only can throw apples out for him. Those were Dee's own sentences. And then he figured out, before any of his classmates did, with some help from his clinician, his speech language pathologist, how to put a border around his written work. And so he selected a border, and he learned the steps that you have to go through. Remember how important sequencing was as a goal for him. So this was a chance for him to work on his creativity by identifying a border that appealed to him, his sequencing skills, and then his communication skills. And I want to tell you the story of one day, one of his classmates looked over at his work on his computer screen and said, "I'm going to do that." And I said, Dee can show you how to do that. And then I held my breath. But as I did, he did, in fact, show his classmate, instead of being silly and making faces and getting under the table, he taught his classmate how to go through the steps to put a border on his written work as well. So this did all kinds of good for his enhanced self-concept, his communication skills, his social status, because he was doing some real communicating and showing something that he knew and the other student didn't. So this was his poem that he wrote for the classroom poetry slam. And again, he had help getting the words on the page, but it's all his own words. I have a red shirt. It has footballs and basketballs on it. My shirt has 2 buttons in the shape of footballs. My shirt is blue and yellow and black and orange. My mom bought my red shirt for me. I like my red shirt. And he was able to read his poem at the poetry slam with the help of one of his classmates. So again, collaboration. At the end of the year, he showed all kinds of increased confidence. His peers were accepting him as a member of the class. He showed more vocabulary and syntax in the sentences that he dictated and demonstrated this sort of literate spoken language. He knew that written language is oral language written down, and his teacher now began to expect more of him, and it was quite significant. This is an example from a boy called Marcus, who was in 4th grade, about 9. He was in an after-school writing lab whose aim was expository writing. He was referred by his teacher for help with reading comprehension and self-organization. And it was the teachers in this building who, the 4th and 5th grade teachers, who asked us to come to work with the students on their report writing skills or their expository writing. Marcus was friendly and kind, but shy about participating. So that baseline sample that we used in this case was not our usual story writing baseline. It was a probe for expository discourse, and we just asked the kids, and they did this in their handwriting, think about something you know about, plan and write a report that will be interesting to others. So we transcribed Marcus's handwriting. He wrote about a chopper, is a helicopter that is used with the Army on the doctor and museums. In the Army, they used when a man gets shot. They used it when they had it for bombs, when they fight, and they used it for emergency from the doctor when they have somewhere far to go. They used the chopper for the museums if you dress up as an Army man. So not all these sentences make a total sense, but he had a lot of ideas he wanted to get into his report about helicopters. So the next step for Marcus was to establish some goals based on his baseline sample. One of his issues was his self-organizational skills. So for self-organization, his clinician and he set a goal for him to write 3 personal goals each day in writing lab and to check them off as he accomplished them. He wanted to work on reading for meaning, and to do that, he needed to think about what kinds of questions did he want to answer when he was looking for information for one of his reports, and then to be able to search the internet for sources. So there's a computer literacy skill. And looking at headings and pictures and captions in the text before reading the segment, stopping at the end of each section and asking, oh, what was this about? What did I learn? And writing down keywords or sentences on a note card to use later when drafting his article. You see over here his planning sheet, what I did today. And each day he and his clinician wrote down when he was working on his snakes project. At first, he was researching and planning, and one of the things that struck him was that garden snakes don't bite. That was important to him. You see his clinician's notes there as well. During writing processes, he learned the goal was for him to be able to write a topic sentence with at least 3 supporting ideas and a summary sentence in each paragraph, and to use computer tools to revise and edit, including adding additional details if they weren't there. And this shows an example of some of the notes that he took in the pink box. The snake's muscles are very complicated. He hand wrote these notes, but I've transcribed them for you. On the sides of the snake's body, it expand and contract to help push it along. The snake also has muscles in its head for eating, and you can certainly see his oral language influences here. Some of his African-American dialect is apparent. And on the right, you see how we would sometimes need to print the works in progress each day, so that if this were a day that they didn't have access to the computer, which was an historical problem, maybe not so much today, that they could work on it. I think it's important for them to be able to read what they've written and to be able to mark it up as this student has. And notice he's also put some numbers here on how he might like to reorganize his work so he could make it make more sense. Gives you a chance to work on word processing and cut and paste and spell checking as some of his digital literacy competencies. Here's the outcome of that particular point in time. He his final published story, and we always had a publishing party where the kids read their stories to their parents and their peers, and we celebrated with punch and cheese and crackers, which was more grown up than cookies. Anyway, his goal progress included that he was able to use the goals he set to guide his work, to work independently. He was able to read for meaning. He still had to have cues to stop at the end of each paragraph and think about what he learned and by paraphrasing it, but he was getting better at paraphrasing the material for notes. And he referred to the text when he needed to remind himself of the content. He also was better at writing his 3-paragraph article, although he still needed some prompting for indenting paragraphs. He was able to mark sentence boundaries using periods, etc., with appropriate cueing, very little cueing. And of course, he picked the most gross picture he could find about how the snake eats. And you can see the influence of some of his notes in his final writing. One of the things that we've learned over time is how important it is to mark the broader outcomes for the students, as well as kind of accomplishing their numerical objectives. And one of the things for Marcus, remember, was that he was had such difficulty being organized. And at the end of one of his sessions, the clinician said, why was it so easy for you to keep working on your article by yourself and not get distracted? And he said, because I'm so organized, and those are the moments you live for. This was Marcus's final report about constellations. Notice that he's being pretty meta-linguistic about this. This paragraph is about history of constellations, but he's very clearly set himself up with a topic sentence, which also can help students figure out that when they're reading other people's writing, they should expect the first sentence of the paragraph to give them some hint as to what it's going to be about, a topic sentence. In the 16th century, explorers went to the southern seas and mapped the southern sky. That means they wrote down the stars. So you can see his personalization or his paraphrasing that demonstrates his comprehension. They went to the sea and saw the stars that nobody knew about, and the map became ancient. I love that one. The men had a long piece of paper and put down the stars and saw things like animals and traced them. The men named the 88 constellations so they could remember them. You see, we could have done some more editing here, but you always run out of time. Constellations have been developed as early as 4000 BC, almost 6,000 years ago. This paragraph is about describing constellations. And it goes on. Leo, finally it ends. Leo the lion is a constellation. Leo the lion has 15 stars in its body. There is a big star in the lion's foot. The lion's heart is a star called Regales. The best time to see him is in April. I picked Leo the lion because he is one of my favorite animals. Nice progress, evidence. Now I want to show you a little something about Jacob. Jacob was a third grader at this point in time. And part of the third grading curriculum in Michigan is writing reports on animals. So in preparing for this writing process activity, the teacher and our speech language graduate students developed this planning sheet. So the animal that Jacob was choosing to write about, and by the way, Jacob started with us in the middle of grade 2. He was a very reluctant writer. He barely wrote any words in his baseline story. He had all kinds of ways to avoid writing, including acting so naughty that his teacher sent him into the hallway. But by the third grade, he has developed an interest in writing and sees its possibilities as communication. So the classroom lessons for him included vocabulary, making an animal choice, and then searching in the computer, entering keywords that would help him answer the questions that were on his organizing sheet, being able to find information on the computer and read to see if it answers his questions, to be able to take notes. So for this, we taught a mini lesson that had the students learning how to read it, cover it, or darken the screen, depending on if it's a print book or internet source. Say it in your own words, and then write down some of those keywords. Organizing their notes then to decide what goes with what and what they should be telling the reader. So treating it as a communication opportunity, even though they're developing their writing skills. And then using the author chair to read their draft. So again, we've tried to print whenever they use the computers each session so they could have something concrete the next session that they could read to their peers. And then they would call on peers to comment and question and use that input to add information. So you can see here his initial research showed him that bats were animals living in caves, and he liked that word crevices, that they were a mammal, that they were, they don't walk, that they, their food source was insects, small animals, and the blood of large animals. They migrate in the winter, go to the North Sea, again in the winter. They do it in a group. Got a little help with shared pencil there. And what hazards do they face? Well, cars, I don't know about that one. You can see here his draft at one point. Bats are mammals, them have 8-inch wingspan. They have hair, fleu, which I believe is fur, and fingers. Bats eat insects and small animals, eats blood, large animals. And then by the time he got over here to his final report, which you see, he put this lovely border on. Bats are mammals that have an 8-inch wingspan. They have hair, fur, and fingers. Bats eat insects, small animals, and drink the blood from big animals. The bats migrate in winter. Bats migrate to the North Sea. They travel alone or in a group. The dangers are cars, because they might get hit, they might get shot by men. So sometimes you let kids have the ownership of their own ideas. So when he read this to his friends in his report, somebody asked, how long do bats live? And at that point, Jacob takes off out of the classroom, and his teacher says, hey, Jacob, where are you going? And he says, I need how long bats live. And again, that's what you want. You want them to use these digital literacy skills to see how they can provide them the answers that they need and do it automatically. I'm going to end with Josh as an example. Josh was an 8th grader who had a profile of dyslexia. He was identified by a school district as having a specific learning disability, and he came to our after-school computer lab activities. He had very strong social skills and good self-regulation, but spelling was his nemesis. So you can see here in this example of his baseline story, which was actually written in response to a question or a picture really on the test of written language. He wrote, the cavemen fighted off the great mammoths. They throw spears at the mammoths. They kept coming. They wanted food. More cavemen come and fend them off, but they unsuccessful. So even word boundaries, all these subword skills were very difficult for him. Then they throw rocks and stones, and they won the battle, but not the war between man and beast. So really a nice literary sentence. They may come back or not, but they will be ready. So you can see he's got some discourse and sentence level skills that are just obscured by his really abominable lack of word level skills. So I've organized his goals showing the language levels. So at all goal language levels, and then for social skills as well, there are some that are clearly opportunities to work on digital literacy abilities. So generating story ideas using computer supports. One of the things he tended to do was just write about dogs and horses, and we wanted him to expand his horizons a little bit. In sentences, he tended to write just simple sentences and be very safe, although he had the ability. So we wanted him to use peer editing to add details to his scores, peer feedback, and also to use computer features to insert when he had a more difficult or complex sentence that he could put into his story. We wanted him primarily to be able to use a spell checker to correct spelling during editing. It wasn't our primary goal to help him with his decoding and encoding abilities, but that was certainly a level of interest. And so for Josh, one of the things he needed to learn to do, he quickly learned the spell checkers in 2 different programs, but he needed to be able to himself produce good enough phonetic equivalents while drafting that the computer would recognize the word he was trying to spell and give him some alternatives that included the correct one. So we did some direct instruction on morpho-orthographic relationships, but learning to use the spell checker was really important to him. And also we had some social skill for him. His first published story, I just wanted to show you because it shows both how he solved the problem of worrying about upper and lower case. And he just kept all caps on. You've probably seen that before. He was not too bad at punctuation, but he played it safe on words, and he did have some help with spelling because this was a published story. It wasn't his baseline story. But you see, he wrote really very simple sentences. One morning, Duke woke me up. We played with his Chewy toy. I threw it up and he caught it. We did it a couple of times. Then we ate breakfast. Then it goes on. So here's that goal to improve his independent spelling using the computer skills. And as I said, he mastered the spell checker in 2 programs and improved his skills at producing a good phonetic equivalent when so that the computer could respond. This is an example. Again, it's been edited, so it's not his independent spelling, but it shows how he was able to use the spell checker and he wrote this lovely story about his Tom. I'm Tom, and here's my band of misfits. We're to protect the colony of Z6. You see that he's playing it safe, not so much as he was before. The colony is pretty peaceful. Sometimes we help other colonies with their troubles. We fly a Mustang XL 117. Sometimes we engage the enemy in battle at the very ends of the universe. And it goes on. It's a lovely little story. So I hope that this discussion has helped you kind of think about how to be flexible, to use all the kinds of internet and computer skills that we all take advantage of in today's modern world to help students develop their skills as a thinker, as a communicator, as a writer. You can work with them on any of these digital literacy competencies, the functional skills, finding evaluation and evaluating information, their critical thinking, communicating, collaborating, creativity skills, all stages of the writing process, and work on all levels in tandem with their writing and their processing skills. Here at the end, and on your handout, I've put references. These are just the references to some of the written work that we produce based on our work with students in teaching them these skills. I want to thank you. I look forward to our group chat for this section of our symposium. I'd appreciate it if you'd send me any questions that can help me prepare for the group chat. There's my email address. Thank you for attending. Have a good day.